Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to share some of our work and thoughts around data on student parents. And I'm just going to launch right in. I'm Lindsey Cruse. I'm a study director at the Institute for Women's Policy Research, and I'll be followed by my colleagues Meredith and Stephanie, who can introduce themselves when they start. So just to give you a little context for what we're going to talk about today, I wanted to start with what we all love, data on student parents. So we know from national data that there are about 4 million student parents enrolled in higher education right now, and the largest share of those students are enrolled at community colleges. Nearly 3/4 of student parents are mothers, and over 2 million, or 2 in 5 of all student parents, are single mothers. And students of color are likely to be raising kids while enrolled. Black women and Indigenous women in particular are likely to be raising kids while pursuing a degree or certificate, and they're also very likely to have children under the age of 5. In addition, we know that students are likely to be adults, 25 and older, working part or full time, and navigating college as first-gen students. And so, as you'll hear later in the presentation as well, student parents hold a range of identities that we've identified as, needing explicit attention and intervention to make sure that they're achieving equitable outcomes. But importantly, when you look at graduation rates, and the next slide, for student parents, there is a major equity gap in completion for students with kids. You can see that just about 1/4 of student parents enrolled in community college leave with a degree or certificate within 6 years of enrolling, compared with higher shares of their both traditional or dependent and non-traditional or independent counterparts. And this matters because we know there are concrete economic benefits to earning a degree. There's a wealth of research that establishes, graduates have significantly higher lifetime earnings, higher employment rates, better health outcomes. Their kids have better outcomes, both academically and behaviorally. So we know that there's significant benefits, and these are even more important for student parents because they are both more likely to live in or near poverty, and they tend to take on significant debt to pay for their college education. So IWPR, the Institute for Women's Policy Research, conducted a cost-benefit analysis to understand what the economic returns were for single moms. We wanted to build a case for investing in their ability to get to and through college. And what we found is that as a result of the earnings gains that single mothers see from earning a degree, as well as, from the earnings gains they earn from getting a degree, they see significant economic returns. For every dollar they spend on earning a BA, they get nearly $8 back. For earning an AA, they get over $12. And there's even some economic return for just earning some college credit. So making sure that student parents, single moms, have the supports they need to get to and through college is essential, not just for their family's economic well-being, but for the benefits they put out to society, such as paying more in taxes and savings and public assistance receipt. Unfortunately, our higher ed system is really not set up to either understand or serve these students. And while there's a wealth of qualitative evidence around who student parents are, what they experience in college, and what challenges they face to completion, few data exists to tell us the story quantitatively, which we know is really important for making a case to leadership of colleges and our policy leaders. So we recently released a briefing paper that summarizes where you can find data on student parents, where you can't find data on student parents, and how we can start to incorporate data collection on students' parent status and other important characteristics like age of their children, number of children, and other variables related to caregiving. And in this table, you can see a summary of some of this work, both where you can and can't find data on students' parent status. And importantly, some of the major sources of information on currently enrolled students, like IPEDS and the National Student Clearinghouse, do not have data on parent status. And unfortunately, most institutions and state systems also are not collecting these data. The FAFSA now does have a question that asks if students have kids, but we don't know how old those kids are, and not everybody fills out the FAFSA, so it's not a complete source of information either. So closing these gaps is really essential for us to understand the unique experiences that student parents have while they're in school, and to inform and craft interventions that can effectively meet those needs and help promote students' completion. And before I hand it off to Meredith, I just want to mention one thing about defining student parents. It's a tricky characteristic, right? Parent feels limited, but there are a lot of different configurations that make up a family and that can lead to someone providing the main source of care for a child. So when IWPR says student parent, we mean anybody really who's providing, the majority of care and financial support for a child. This could be a grandparent, a step parent, a foster parent, siblings in some cases. But the term, of course, feels limited sometimes, and it's tricky. I think everybody has to decide what works for them in their institution or organization. And another thing to note is that marital status is also tricky. It's not a static state. It's also not always defined just by legal status. So again, we want to make sure that because quantitative data can only tell us so much, that we're pairing this analysis with that qualitative work that can ground the data in students' lived experiences. So with that, I'll turn it over to Meredith.
Thanks so much, Lindsey. So I'm Meredith Hatch, Senior Associate Director at Achieving the Dream. And over the past 2 years, the Achieving the Dream Network has really increased the focus on effective and innovative strategies that increase college persistence and completion for working women students and student parents. We're calling this effort Community College Women Succeed, and we're documenting this work on Twitter using the hashtag that you see here. As part of this work, Achieving the Dream deployed a survey to the full Achieving the Dream network in August 2019, so just about a year ago. And I'm going to talk about some of the findings of this specific survey today. So we received responses from 97 institutions across the Achieving the Dream network, and contributors were a wide range of campus stakeholders. So provosts, presidents, deans, and other administrators, folks from academic affairs, student success, financial aid, institutional research, and institutional effectiveness. Faculty members were also consulted for their contributions to this survey. And we asked questions to colleges about how they understand who their students are and their unique needs, which Achieving the Dream believes is foundational to successful student success strategies. In addition, we asked questions to understand barriers and strategies that colleges are using to increase persistence and completion. So a little bit more about the findings now. So one of the questions that we asked is very relevant to today's session. So understanding how institutions were tracking student parent status. And Lindsey described how this is a complicated question. And the way that we asked it was first tracking students with dependent children. So that was our definition in the survey. And we found that in general, colleges are not tracking students who are parents. About a quarter of respondents, so you'll see in that darkest green color, were tracking students with dependent children. About 20% were planning to track. In terms of not planning to track, that's the yellow color, we had nearly a similar amount, so 23%. And then a full third of respondents from institutions didn't know if their institution tracked student parents. In terms of understanding barriers to tracking student parent data, some institutions pointed to a lack of staff capacity as to why they weren't tracking these data, different tracking difficulties, and privacy concerns as key reasons why they did not collect data on which of their current students are parenting. Nearly 3 in 10 community colleges surveyed said that they had not considered asking students whether or not they had children. So that's giving you a glimpse into why a year ago colleges were noting that they had some barriers to tracking students with dependent children. We asked a little bit about how colleges were tracking this data. And so the majority of institutions surveyed said that they were using FAFSA data. And a fair number also asked this question explicitly on their application. As you know, not all students complete the FAFSA, so depending on FAFSA alone is going to miss some student parents. Now, I do want to talk for a moment about something that Lindsey touched on and Stephanie is also going to describe. So in Achieving the Dream survey, respondents frequently noted that student parents have intersecting identities and what this meant for data collection too. So colleges frequently noted tracking data on adult students, on gender, sometimes on parenting status, but not together. So consider how your institution may disaggregate data. Is it on one dimension or characteristic at a time? Or are you considering students' intersecting identities? Here's a glimpse at just a few intersecting identities or layered identities for student parents. So we know that compared with a traditional or dependent student under the age of 25, so younger students, student parents are more likely to live in or near poverty. Student parents work on the average, work one more day per week than dependent students. So that's a full 8 hours. And we understand that time is a precious commodity, particularly for student parents and particularly now. Student parents are more likely to enroll part-time than other students. And student parents are also more likely to be first-generation students. So these are really important intersections to consider in your student success work and when you're thinking about data collection. Now I'm going to pass the presentation to Stephanie to talk a little bit about her work at Kingsborough Community College.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Akunvabey, and I currently serve as the Interim Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs at Kingsborough Community College, where I've actually worked for over 11 years in a number of different capacities. Kingsborough is known for a lot of great student support services that we provide, and just for overall sort of generally speaking, pretty decent outcomes. We've been noted as an Achieving the Dream Leader College. We've ranked pretty well in terms of Aspen. And a lot of that has been driven by our commitment to the exploration of data and how we use that data to make decisions on our campus about how we improve the services that we provide to our student population. For example, if we're looking at retention and graduation rates at Kingsborough, overall our retention rate is about 72.6% for year-to-year retention, and a 3-year graduation rate of 31.8%, which is notable within the community college sector. However, those data points don't tell us a lot about what's actually happening in our students' lives. Instead, there are lots of other things that we need to consider. These are all, or at least a good representation of the different factors that influence our students' lives on our campuses. Personal issues, single parenthood. A lot of our students do face homelessness. Many of our students, because we're in Brooklyn, New York, we're an incredibly diverse campus. We have students who speak over 70 languages on our campus. All of those things are really important, and those are things that we've started to consider as we explore equity on our campus. But as Meredith was saying, we often have considered those things in a vacuum and not considered the intersectionality that often occurs between these areas and what that means for our students. So as we start to explore and dig deeper into our equity work, we've been forced to really consider the full lives of our students. If we're going to talk about holistic supports, we have to think about holistic supports for whom. Have we only been considering holistic supports in terms of that traditional student, knowing that we don't have a traditional population? Community college students generally are older and have additional responsibility. So we have to really start to rethink what we do to meet their needs. At Kingsborough, we have made a concerted effort to center equity in all that we do. The traditional ATD framework was a great starting point for us, and it really asked us to start to think about what a student-focused culture would mean. Within the KCC context, we readily understood that equity had to be the driving force behind everything that we were doing if we were serious about improving those equity gaps and student success outcomes that we know tend to really, really persist, especially for groups that have been traditionally underserved. Our intent around equity was to have it be infused in some of the college's most important areas, such as our strategic plan. And we're happy to say that equity is involved in our strategic plan, our academic plan, and many of the other things that happen on our campus that help really drive policy and processes on our campus. With equity at the center of all we do, we've traditionally explored some of the needs of our Black and Latino males, for our students with accessibility and different learning abilities. We've explored the experiences of first-generation students on our campus. More recently, we've had the opportunity to engage in some of the work with Achieving the Dream around college success for single mothers. And hence, we've now participated in what we are calling on our campus, the Treasure Project. What we found is that we have a number of supports for women on our campus. Our KCC Flex program was designed to start to think about remote learning structures, targeting parenting students prior to our need to be remote as a result of the pandemic. We also are fortunate to have a childcare center and a women's center that all, again, provide support for our students on campus, but we weren't working in an intentional way. The areas do make referrals to each other, but we haven't had a system-wide or college-wide institutional approach to how we really think about these resources and provide them in a streamlined way to our single parenting moms. Again, recognizing that data is sort of the driving force behind much of the work that we do, we have designed a data plan for the Treasure Project. Again, thinking back on that idea of who are our single mothers. As part of this data plan, we decided we needed to start with what we have, recognizing that there are gaps in terms of national data sources. We are starting with the FAFSA just to get a sense of how many single parenting moms do we have on our campus. That quantitative analysis is really helpful as we begin this work, but we are prepared to develop surveys, again, that get at those qualitative components that are super important, especially as we're thinking about intersectionality. For example, if we're talking about a single mom of color who has a child that is 6 years or younger, that's very different than talking about a mom who might be a parent to a child who is 12. And there are nuances within the literature that tell us that the types of supports that mothers need based on child age, for example, and the number of children within a particular age bracket, it varies widely. And so those are things we want to start to pay a little bit more attention to. Aside from understanding who our single mothers are, we also want to make an effort to learn from our single parenting moms. It's no mistake that we chose the Treasure Project as the name for our efforts on our campus. In many cases, parenting is seen as a challenge and an additional sort of impediment to degree attainment. And the reality is single parenting moms do face some struggles, but a lot of times the very thing that is a challenge is also serving as one of their primary motivational factors. We know from anecdotal evidence that moms, single moms who choose to come and pursue a degree at this point, they're doing it quite oftentimes in hopes of, again, providing better opportunities for themselves and for their families. So we want to learn more about what are those motivational pieces? What are the supports that really help them make it across the finish line? In a much more intentional way, rather than sort of a haphazard, yay, you made it kind of situation. And then, of course, we're thinking about the long term for this work is what are the existing campus attitudes towards single moms on our campus? The reality is oftentimes there are some stigmas associated with parents, specifically for single moms. And that can vary from a number of things in terms of cultural background, religious beliefs, that the reality is our staff and faculty bring these elements with them to work. And the only way to start to address some of these nuances is if we understand what the campus attitudes are towards single moms on our campus, and we can start to engage faculty to help build a better family-friendly campus and build family-friendly classrooms. So what are the practical implications for this work? We have seen the fruits of our labor when we've looked at equity issues for other groups. CUNY has a CUNY Fatherhood Academy, and a lot of that work stemmed from the larger national discussions around the experiences of Black and Latino males and what their educational disparities were when we looked at overall outcomes in terms of degree completion, retention, and those other typical factors. So the CUNY Fatherhood Academy is a good example of what strong data can do in order to create bigger and broader policy and practice implications, not at just one institution, but on a system level, and in many cases on a national level as well. So the CUNY Fatherhood Academy is something that we're really proud of, and we're grateful to have that on our campus, but we understand there's also a gap there. There's been this attention on fathers, and we haven't had the same type of attention on single mothers, which we know, based on our preliminary information, quite often single mothers tend to be the primary caregivers for these children. So what we found is that even though we have this Fatherhood Academy, and the males who are engaged in this particular effort, a lot of times they aren't the primary caregivers for their children. They're parents, but they aren't necessarily the person who's providing more than 50% of the care and or economic support for the child in question. So how can you begin this work on your campus? We understand that based on even the data that Meredith shared earlier, not all campuses are starting to think about how and if it's even necessary to collect data around single moms at this point. For us, it was a natural next step, but it came after a long road of general equity conversations that needed to be had on our campus. Traditional data collection methods typically focus on traditional students, thinking about the needs and supports of that 18 to 25-year-old population. And generally speaking, that's just not who we're serving anymore. The idea of a sort of graying and browning of America, as people talk about the American population is naturally getting older, naturally becoming more diverse in terms of race and ethnicity, we have to start to think about equity in a new and refined way and start to really apply what we learn through these data collection processes on our campuses if we're serious about improving retention efforts and recruiting new populations to our campuses. So what I'd say is for us at Kingsborough, this work required a lot of patient urgency. We knew that there was a strong need to advance this work as quickly as possible, but there were also lots of processes and policies and other types of barriers that did make the work seem a long way off. That being said, with persistence, strong data, and a large variety of data sources that really help tell a tale of what the student experiences are, you find a group of people who are serious about student success and who start to understand the data and understand the story that the data tells and the implication that that has for our student lives, and the work begins to advance. I'll hand it back to Meredith to wrap us up.
Thank you, Stephanie and Lindsey, and thank you everyone for participating in this innovation session. We've been posting in the chat throughout the session, and we hope that you'll follow up with us in a follow-up session, and also by looking at the resources that we're sharing with you today. Take care.